Hello, my name is Derek Atkins, and this is part 2 of the video lecture entitled Living with Technology, a Theology and Ethics of Technology. This video lecture is for the course Church, Society, and Ethical Issues in Asia at the East Asia School of Theology. In the first video lecture of this lesson, we went through a very brief history of technology. Then we looked at a wide variety of ethical issues related to our use of technology. In this video lecture, we're going to attempt to develop a theology and ethics of technology to give us some tools that will help us to better navigate the many different ethical issues related to our use of technology. So let's begin by looking at how technology is portrayed in the Bible. In Genesis chapter 2, verses 2b through 4a, we read, "Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, but Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock." From this passage, we can infer that Cain used farming tools as he worked the soil, while Abel used some kind of knife to bring fat portions from his flock as an offering to the Lord. This then appears to be the first indirect mention of tools in the Bible. Later, in Genesis 4:21, we read that Jubal was the father of all who played the harp and lute. And in Genesis 4:22, it says that Tubal-Cain forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. So from almost the beginning of the Bible, we see humans making use of technology. In Genesis 6, we see the next major mention of technology as God gives very specific instructions to Noah for building an ark to save Noah, his family, and 2 of every kind of animal from God's coming judgment. However, in Genesis 11, verses 1 through 9, we see humanity using technology in rebellion against God. In this passage, we see a united humanity coming together to build a tower that reaches to the heavens. This was a temple, very likely a ziggurat, dedicated to the worship of a false god. The construction of this temple would have certainly required the use of tools and building techniques. Now, I just want to point out that I put the Samarra Mosque on this slide because I speculate that this is probably similar to what the Tower of Babel looked like given early human technology. Thus, in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, which is often referred to as the universal history of man, we see technology being used both in rebellion against God and in obedience to God. In the book of Exodus, we see technology used again in rebellion against God as the Hebrews are conscripted as slaves for building massive temples and pyramids to the glory of Egyptian pharaohs who were regarded as living God. We also see the Israelites themselves using technology to rebel against God as they fashion a golden calf for pagan worship while Moses is up on Mount Sinai receiving the 10 Commandments. Then, beginning in Exodus 35, the Israelites build the tabernacle, a movable temple, using very detailed instructions given by God. These include not only the instructions for building the tabernacle, but also instructions for fashioning the articles to be used for worship inside the tabernacle, such as the altars, basins for washing, lampstand, as well as the Ark of the Covenant. In Exodus, we again see technology used both in rebellion against God and in obedience to God. In Psalm 27, King David writes, "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God." In King David's day, chariots were cutting-edge weapons. Yet in this verse, King David places his trust not in technological innovation to save himself and the nation of Israel, but rather he places his trust in God. If we go from higher to lower, that is, from the king to the commoner, to the common people, this verse counsels all of us to put our trust not in any form of technology to save ourselves, but to trust in the Lord alone. Going back to Exodus 15:21, Miriam the prophetess sings, "Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea." This song, of course, refers to the miraculous deliverance of the Israelites from the Egyptian army when God parted the Red Sea. Here, God himself destroyed the Egyptian army, despite the Egyptians' use of technologically sophisticated battle chariots. God thus demonstrates his power over all forms of human technology. In the New Testament, Paul worked with technology as a tent maker to support himself during his missionary travels. Paul and others also used the Roman roads, a remarkable feat of engineering, as well as expertly built ships to spread the gospel throughout the Roman Empire. God uses technological metaphors in both the Old Testament and the New Testament to communicate his message. For example, in Jeremiah 18, God compares himself to a potter and the Israelite to clay that he fashions according to his purposes. Toward the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus uses the parable of the wise and foolish builders to compare our obedience or disobedience to the stability or lack thereof of houses built by architects. Elsewhere in the New Testament, Peter calls believers living stones that are being built into a spiritual house. Thus, we see technology portrayed in the Bible as an integral part of human cultures from almost the very beginning of human history. In the Bible, we see technology being used both in rebellion against God and in obedience to God. Paul and other early believers provide us with examples of believers using technology to spread the gospel in accordance with God's redemptive purposes. Now that we've looked at how technology is portrayed in the Bible, we're ready to attempt constructing a theology of technology. In Genesis 1:28, God commands Adam and Eve to rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves on the ground. God thus gave mankind dominion over the created order. Humans, therefore, have responsibility under God to care for God's creation. When coupled with the Great Commission given by Jesus in Matthew 28, verses 18 to 20, believers also have a calling to influence culture and politics so that social practices and government policies will reflect God's character and purposes for his world. The joining of these two commands is often collectively known as the cultural mandate. One of the ways that humans bear God's image is that we create things like God does, although our ability to create is on a far, far lesser scale than God's ability to create. Among other things, human creativity means we are able to create tools and techniques. In short, technology. This is why the biblical record attests to the reality that technology is an integral part of human societies. The development of technology is thus one of the ways which humans can fulfill the cultural mandate given to them by God. Because of Adam and Eve's disobedience, sin entered the world and affected all aspects of human existence, including our use of technology. We see this misuse beginning with Cain's murder of Abel. Given that Abel most likely used a knife of some sort to present fat portions to the Lord, it is very possible that Cain took Abel's knife and used it to murder Abel. Later, with the Tower of Babel, technology was used to rebel against God by building a temple dedicated to the worship of other gods. Despite sin's corrupting influence, we still see instances in the Bible where technology was used to further God's purposes. This is seen in both the Old Testament and in the New Testament. At this point, a very helpful question to ask is, what is technology for? In other words, what is the purpose of technology, or to what ends should we use technology? Here, we see teleological concern playing an important role in clarifying the use of technology. From the biblical narrative, we see that the original purpose of technology was to help humans to better care for and manage God's good creation. Combined with Jesus' Great Commission, we see that another fundamental purpose of technology is to further God's redemptive purposes on earth. Following the fall, one other important purpose of technology is to alleviate the effects of the fall. This alleviation can be seen in practices such as developing drugs and other medical treatments to fight disease and other physical ailments, all of which are consequences of the fall. Many people today are asking, is AI technology good or bad? We can broaden this question to ask, is technology in general good or bad? Now, there is often the assumption that technology is neutral, that it becomes either good or bad based upon the choices people make. This sounds intuitively true, but the reality is that technology is not neutral. For example, a gun can be used for either self-defense or to carry out criminal activity. But this does not change the fact that the gun has a single purpose: to kill animals or people. Please note here that I am not trying to advocate either for or against gun rights. I am only trying to point out that guns are not a neutral technology. Another example of how technology is not neutral is that during the past few decades, many Christians have used the internet to spread the gospel. This is indeed a worthwhile use of the internet, but there is also abundant evidence that the spread of the internet is most likely responsible in part for an increasing acceptance in many nations of profoundly unbiblical beliefs and practices such as atheism and LGBTQ plus lifestyles. So if technology is not neutral, then where do we begin in our attempt to use technology to better serve God's purposes? I have a modest suggestion to make. For thousands of years, medical doctors have sworn allegiance to the Hippocratic Oath. One of the first commands of the Hippocratic Oath is, do the patient no harm. I suggest that when deciding which technology to use and how technology should be used, the command do no harm is a very helpful starting point. This means technology should be used to improve people's lives and to lessen the harm caused by the fall. However, technology should not be used to harm people, whether that harm is intentional or unintentional. For example, using technology to give some athletes unfair competitive advantage would be wrong, because doing so harms those athletes who don't have access to such technology. We also need to consider the place of technology in our lives and in society. We live in a world in which technology plays an integral part of our lives, a reality that is often reflected in the very language we speak. For example, we speak of our minds as being programmed by what we see, hear, read, watch, and listen to. Or we compare our brains to computers. We also speak of how insurance companies need to process our claims as if insurance underwriters are following some kind of flow chart, which may indeed be the case. I'm not saying that we should get rid of all technological metaphors. After all, we saw earlier that the Bible also uses technological metaphors. But I am suggesting that we should be aware of how technology shapes how we view the world, even how we view ourselves. On a personal level, we need to consider how we use technology. For example, when we're using social media, do we create posts that draw attention to ourselves, or do we create posts that direct attention toward others and toward God? Of course, it's good to post pictures from our lives, but do we really need to post 50 pictures from last month's vacation, or will only one photo be enough? Even then, we need to be thoughtful, because with social media, we're often presenting to the world a curated image of our lives. Are we lying with our posts, whether intentionally or even unintentionally? A far greater concern these days is what we actually say and write on our social media platforms. Given that outrage is often the business model for many social media platforms, the temptation to respond to the latest outrage with our own rants is very real. James 1:9 counsels us, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. One tool I find very helpful when deciding whether to post something or not is the acronym THINK, or think. T stands for the question, is it true? H stands for the question, is it helpful? In other words, will this post that I'm thinking of making move the conversation in a helpful direction. Can stand for various things. It can stand for, is it inspiring? Is it interesting? Or is it instructive? N stands for, is it necessary? Do I really need to make this post? Does what I'm about to say really need to be said? And then K stands for the question, is it kind? Because sometimes it's not necessarily what we say, but how we say it that makes all the difference. So in many cases, if I have a post that doesn't check all 5 of these boxes of the THINK acronym, I don't post it. And I do try to follow this THINK acronym. Finally, our hope should not be in technology. Many look to technology to cure all of society's problems and to cure every personal difficulty. Some look forward to a post-scarcity world in which poverty will be a thing of the past and people will have every material possession they could possibly wish for. Others look to technology to unlock the secret to living forever. However, technology cannot save us because the real problem is sin, and no technology can solve the sin problem. This is why only God can save us. And the good news is that God has worked in history to deal with our sin through the person and work of Jesus Christ. So this means we should not fear technology, nor should we idolize technology. Instead, we should use technology to glorify God through our work and play, and use whatever tools we are blessed with to improve the lives of those around us. And so we come to the end of this video lecture on a theology and ethics of technology. You probably have lots of questions, so please come to class with your questions. And I look forward to discussing this issue further with you in class.